Hi, welcome to Joe's World. I'm Joe. This podcast was intended to be kind of light and airy and uplifting. That's not always going to be the case, and unfortunately, the first one is going to be a little more serious. Little background on me. I was a veteran. I was an Air Force photographer, and then I went into law enforcement and spent 27 years doing that. And finally, now I'm strictly a photographer, which I love. But I found out that I was damaged. And sometimes we hide it so well that we don't even realize it ourselves. And how did I discover this? Well, I started to follow a veteran support group on Facebook, Project Refit. And it started out just watching their streams. And then I would make a comment every once in a while. And then I had somebody reach out and say, hey, you need to be in here. You need to be part of this. Because they recognized something in me, I guess from my comments, that I didn't even know was there. And so I started participating and realized that I displayed a lot of the same behaviors. I don't even want to call them symptoms, but a lot of the same behavior that a lot of vets with PTSD and depression exhibited. And I started digging into my own mind a little bit to see where it came from, and I realized it's because I was a hoarder, and that the hoarding gene ran very strong in my. But this wasn't like the comic books or the Star Trek memorabilia that I collected, but this was pain and hurt and trauma, and it starts when you're very young. Getting beat up on the school bus by the older kids. I have a spot for that. I have a box I can put that hurt in. And getting bullied in middle school and moving into high school. I had a box for that, and I could put that hurt in there. It was my hurt. I didn't have to share it with anybody, and I didn't have to let anybody see it and even think that I was weak. But it hurt. It hurts when your own cousin gets two of his friends, and they grab you and hold you in front of the door to the classroom and make everybody slap you before they walk into the class. That's a special kind of hurt because it's family. It hurts when you ask a girl out to a dance and you realize that you are so low on the social ladder that you don't even rate an answer. She just laughs in your face and turns around and walks away. And so there was a lot of pain and hurt getting put in these boxes. And I didn't share it. I didn't let anybody see it. Nobody ever saw me cry or display any weakness, no matter what happened. And but it was there, and I kept it. My senior year, I had the opportunity to intern at the local National Guard base in the photo lab, and that turned out to be a very good experience for me, and I really loved it. And partway through my senior year, I decided I wanted to be an Air Force photographer, and I told my father, and of course we had a big fight about it because that's not what he wanted me to do. We were fairly certain I was going to wind up in Vietnam when I did that, and he refused to sign the paperwork, and we fought about it. But he eventually signed, and in 1974, I enlisted in the United States Air Force. And I graduated high school, and we had a combination graduation going-away party. I left lovely Hamilton, New Jersey, for Lackland Air Force Base in Texas for basic training. And while I don't necessarily consider it a painful memory, basic training is designed to do one thing, to break down your psyche so that you don't think as me, but as we, as part of a team. And there's some trauma involved in having that done to you. It is something that stays with you for your entire life after it happens. Some people deal with it very well, others don't. I thought it was a good thing for me. I learned to work with others. I learned to also be self-reliant and take responsibility for myself and my actions. And I really kind of liked it. And so when I graduated, we went from there to Denver, to Lowry Air Force Base, where I learned to be a photographer. And that was a good time. I loved Lowry. I loved Denver. There was the normal little things, that you deal with being away from home for the first time. Had wisdom teeth taken out while I was there. That was not a good experience. There was a little pain involved in that. That went in the box. But the big hurt in all that was we had orders to go to Vietnam, and a few days before we graduated, they collected all the orders up. Said nobody's going over to Vietnam anymore. We're only bringing people home. And in order for me to stay on active duty, I would have had to become something other than a photographer. They don't even tell you what. It's like, guess what you're doing? And I didn't want to do that, so I went back to the National Guard base to work as a photographer there, and I really liked it. So, that wasn't really a bad experience. And after I was there for a little bit, I went back for photojournalism school, which was great. And then I went back to the National Guard base, and I met a girl. And things were very serious. We had been talking about getting married, and when I left for combat training, I was in Camp Bullis, Texas for maybe 3 days when I got a letter, which meant she probably mailed it the day I left, and she kind of ripped my heart out, chopped it up like garlic, and threw it in the tomato sauce pot. And I didn't ever want to get involved like that with another female again. I was going to stay single because that was a special kind of hurt, and it had a box all by itself, and it stayed in that box. And along with all the other hurts and pains and traumas that I had endured growing up, from thinking I might have leukemia when I was, 12 or 13, some surgeries, and it was my pain and my trauma. And just like Golem, that was my precious, and I didn't share it with anyone. And I kept it, and I protected it like it was somehow valuable or important. And then we had the first really big incident. I decided to take a 5-mile walk with about 35 pounds of camera gear, taking pictures of ice during an ice storm. And that night I got rushed to the emergency room and was told that I had a major heart attack. I shouldn't even be alive. And I spent a week or two in the ICU, and they ran different tests because they said it couldn't possibly be a heart attack because I was still alive. And, they tested for different things, and then they did the same test again because they didn't believe the results. And then they did the same test and sent it to a different lab. But the end result was that I was not allowed to lift my camera because it was too heavy. I wasn't allowed to go up a flight of steps. So I came home, and of course I took all that hurt and all that pain, and I put it in its appropriate box. And then I picked my camera up and I went out and I took pictures. So what? What if I died? I didn't care. I wasn't afraid of it. I didn't have any friends come visit me. I learned that is not unusual, that especially when someone young has something like that happen, a lot of the people that he or she is friends with will not want to face up to their own mortality, so they just don't come see you. But someone I went to high school with ran into my mother, and they were a music minister at a local church, and they started to come see me. And they would pray with me, and Mike was sure I was going to get healed, and I was sure I was going to die. And we got to the point back then in the mid-'70s where they were going to do a cardiac catheterization on it to see exactly how much damage was done to my heart. And this was a new procedure, and probably quite a few people died while they were doing it. And I jumped at the chance to get it done. And when my time came to have it done, we drove up to Deborah Heart and Lung Center, and they admitted me to the hospital. And it was about a 4 or 5 day hospital stay when they did this. Today, you go in the morning, you come home for lunch. But it was a little more complicated and a little more dangerous back. And the next morning, I go in to get this procedure done, and they cut a slit in your leg near your groin, and they pull out a vein. And they run a tube from the vein right into your heart and pump in some radioactive dye and watch and see how it spreads out so they can see what damage is done to your heart. And they do it while you're awake. It has to be done under local anesthetic. And while Mike had been praying for healing, I had been praying for a painless death. And when they were getting ready to do the procedure, the doctor tells me that they're going to give me some Novocaine. And I am Novocaine resistant. Novocaine doesn't work on me. So much for a painless death. The only thing they have is Novocaine. It will take them several months to reschedule me and have something else there. And so I tell them just to do the procedure. And what kind of anesthetic? So I said, you got some rolls of gauze? So I bit down on rolls of gauze while they did the procedure. and so much for no pain. There was a lot of hurt went in that box that day, but the next day they told me there was nothing wrong with my heart. They didn't know how they got all the test results they did up to that point. I was perfectly healthy. And a day or two later, I went home, and I was recovering nicely when I get a call from Mike asking me if I want to go to the zoo with the young adult group. And sure, what else do I have to do? And he said, would you pick up Donna? You know Donna. I didn't. I had never met her, but she lived not too far from me. I was the closest one to her. So I get to go pick Donna. And I get to the house, and I see Donna Mae for the first time. And it was like getting hit by lightning. And I knew that I just wanted to be with her forever. But I had been hurt so much in the past that I never said a word, and I did everything in the world I could do to avoid her. And it wasn't easy because every time I saw her, it hurt because I wasn't with her. And I finally conceded defeat that I had to ask her out. I had to take that chance, and I did. And she said yes. And everything was a little cloudy from that point on, but I remember we were going out that Friday night, and on Thursday I had to call her up and tell her that my car had been totaled and I had to postpone the date. And she said, if you didn't want to go out with me, why did you ask? You don't need to lie about it. And that really hurt because I had hurt her. And that was the one thing in the world I never wanted to do, was I never wanted to be the one to hurt her, cause her pain. So I immediately said, I'll figure it out and I'll see you on Friday. And Friday morning I went to the bank. I took out every penny I had saved up, and I went out and bought a new car so that I could take her out on Friday. And Friday night I picked her up, and she came out, and she's looking around and goes, where's your car? I said, I told you my car was totaled. That's my car. And it's a white Ford Maverick. And she started to apologize, and I told her I didn't need to hear anything she had to say because I didn't care. I was with her, and nothing else really mattered at that point. And we decided to go to Cherry Hill Mall, maybe see a movie, get something to eat. And I have her by the hand, and we walk into the mall, and there's a Zales jewelry store. And I guess I must have been on autopilot because I just walked into the jewelry store with her, went over to the ring counter, and asked her to pick out an engagement ring. And she hit me because she thought I was teasing her again. And I took out the money left over from buying the car, which was a couple thousand, I guess. And I put it on the counter, and she realized I was serious. I was trying to buy her an engagement ring. And then she laughed at me. I don't know what was worse, getting hit or getting laughed at. So I put the money back in my pocket, and I took her by the hand, and I walked out of the store. And every time she tried to talk to me that night, she would laugh first. And it hurt a little bit each time. But I figured that, I'd get home. It was the worst first date of all time, and I would probably never have to see her again. But we got to her house, and I walked her to the door, and I turned to go back to my car, and I felt her pulling me back, and then there were two hands holding my head, and she pulled me in, and our lips touched, and somewhere between 5 seconds and 5 years later, I walked away, and she said, call me. And I called her every day after that until we were married. It was a little while before she started talking wedding plans, but life was really good, and I really thought there wouldn't be any more hurt or pain, that my boxes were full and everything was wonderful. And we got to the point where I talked to her dad and asked if I could marry his daughter. He said yes. My parents liked her, and we're talking wedding plans, and it's getting a little rough because we're planning a small wedding, and Donna had given me some conditions that I needed to meet if I wanted to marry her. One being I had to have a real job because she didn't consider photography a real job. I had to have a job where you had a schedule, you went in a certain time, you came home a certain time, you had a pension, you had benefits. So I get a job with the Sheriff's Department, and I went in and I wanted to work in the ID Bureau as a photographer. And I got told, absolutely. That was a lie from the pit of hell, because ID was probably the only area that I never worked in while I was there. But they needed people in the jail, and if I was willing to start in the jail, I could have a job immediately. And so I started working in the county jail. And there is a lot of hurt and pain and trauma involved you get locked in with the inmates. There's roughly 120 inmates that you're responsible for over the course of your shift, and all they have to do all day is plot plan how they're going to screw with you. But I didn't care because she was going to marry me, and I could always find another job at some point. Then I found an apartment. We were talking about a year and a half away, but the apartment was too good to wait. I couldn't pass it up because it was such a good deal. So now, instead of living at home, I'm living in an apartment by myself. Donna Mae is living with her parents, and I'm working in a jail. And this is going to go on for probably about a year and a half, we figured at this point, until we got married. And the highlight of my week was I would get home and Donna Mae would be in the apartment sometimes. She would have dinner made for me. That was wonderful. There's a couple little hurts in the box from the cooking. That was it. I would never tell her that. I get to the apartment one day and I walk in and there is no dinner. There is only Donna Mae at the table, ball in her eyes. I ask her what's wrong. She gets out 2 words, "Your mother." And I know it's not going to be good. My mother never said a word to me, but she called up Donna and informed her that if we were not going to get married at St. Joe's in a Catholic ceremony, she was boycotting our wedding. And Donna wanted to get married in the church we had been going to, and I wanted to get married in the church we had been going. And I told her, "I'll fix this." And she said, "How are you going to fix it? It's your mother. We're gonna end up getting married in St. Joe's." And my mother had a habit of steamrolling to get what she wanted, and it was usually easier to go along with her than to fight. But this time she made my wife cry. So I said, "I'll fix this." And I went over to the phone and I called my mother up, told her that Donna was sitting at the kitchen table crying because my mom was insisting we get married in a Catholic church. And my mother was like very adamant and said, "You were born Catholic, you were raised Catholic, you're going to die Catholic, and you're going to get married in a Catholic church." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but if you change your mind, we'll have a spot for you at the wedding." And I hung the phone up and I turned thinking I'm going to be the hero, and I get yelled at for being disrespectful to my mom. Donna looks at me and says, "You can't talk to your mother like that." And I kind of froze for a second. I said, "No, my mother can't talk to my wife like that." Her expression kind of changed, and I knew I had said the right thing. And then I kind of took things a step further. I said, "Let's get married next month." And she said, "What?" I said, "Let's get married next. We have everything. We have everything we need. You have a dress. I have a tux. What do we need? We need a license and we need flowers, and that's everything. How are you going to plan a wedding in a month?" I said, "Parents, grandparents, brothers, and stuff." That was it. That was our wedding party. That was our guest list. Probably would have been simpler to just elope, but that's what we did. My mother hollered at me when we informed her. She said, "You got that girl pregnant." I said, "No, I did not." And she said, "Well, everybody's going to be counted." I said, "Let them count. Tell them get calendars because it's going to be a big count." We didn't have our daughter for 5 years, so we got married. She was a beautiful bride coming down the aisle. She was not happy that I fell asleep in the pastor's office while I was waiting for her, but I got done work at 8 o'clock that morning, and we got married, I think, around 1 in the afternoon, so I only had a couple hours sleep. But we had to do things that way so that we could have a week off for honeymoon. And we got married, and I was still working in the jail. And I would come home and had bleach thrown in my face. There's a little hurt and pain there. Went out 3 or 4 times for smoke inhalation, and there was some hurt and pain there. And but we survived, and I never realized it, but I kept every hurt, every pain, every bad thing that happened as hidden from her as I possibly could. I didn't want her to know what I was going through. I tried to keep it to myself. I didn't want her to have to deal with it, and I did it quite well, which meant I was repressing feelings. It affected how I dealt with her and with others. Then I went through I finally transferred out of the jail and went through the police academy, and I was very proud to make it through the academy and graduate. Felt like I was going to be able to make a difference. I was going to be out there, and I was going to be able to help people. And my first week on the job, I'm driving into Atlantic City, going over the bridge, and there's a car accident. A guy crosses 4 lanes of traffic and hits another car head on. And the car spins, and the back end is hanging out over the water. I call my dispatch on the radio, and they notify Atlantic City to get emergency vehicles out there. And I run over to the car, and Atlantic City fireman is also was on his way into work, I guess. He runs over, and there's a car seat in the back of the car, but there's no baby in it, thank God. And we look around, we make sure there's nobody else in the car. There's just a young woman, brown hair, but the car's hanging over the bridge. It's not real stable. So we extradite her from the vehicle and lay her down on the roadway, and she's not breathing, and we start doing CPR. And she dies while we're doing CPR. All of a sudden, there's just blood everywhere, and her eyes are open, and there's these cold, dead brown eyes staring back at me. And all I wanted to do as a cop was to help people, to save people. And the first time something happens, I failed. And I failed her. I failed her baby. I failed her husband because she was dead. And it hurt. And I might have started a new box for painful things that day. And I had nightmares for quite a while. And that still hangs with me today. But I didn't cry. I did try and walk the drunk over to the edge of the bridge and push him off, but the fireman stopped me. Probably a good thing. And over the course of about the next 24 years, I had other failures. That was the worst. That was the one that hung with me. I had successes where I was able to help people. And I had a pretty good career. And there were promotions. Finally, one day, I'm as high up as I could go. My box is full of pain and hurt or taking up a room by this point, but that's okay because they're mine. I don't have to share them with anybody. Had my dad die, I didn't cry. My mom died, I didn't cry because I was strong. I didn't need help from anybody. And I bring a printer from my office over to Staples to get it repaired, and there's a shoplifter, and I end up chasing him down. And while I'm chasing him down, I get kicked in the chest, and I can't breathe, and there's pain shooting up and down my arms. And I remember that in the police academy, they said, as long as you can breathe, you could win. You don't give up, ever. So by the time my backup got there, I was like collapsed next to him. He was already in handcuffs. And then I did the next stupid thing, and wouldn't go to the ER. And everything was okay for a few days, and then I started passing out at work, and finally had to go to the doctor. And they thought it might have been a heart attack, but they said it was a stress-related issue that had destroyed most of my heart. I had 13% heart function, and I needed to be in the hospital waiting for a transplant. And I refused, and I was out of work for almost a year. I had a lot of vacation and sick time and comp time, and they tried to get me a disability pension, and the county kind of dropped the ball on that. So I am now in a position where I'm out of time. I'm not going to get a paycheck. I'm not going to get a pension, at least not enough of one to live on. So I go back to work. And my genius plan is to die on the job so that my wife gets my full pension. And I actually do things that should have killed me, trying to make sure I died on the job. I get a pacemaker and defibrillator because my doctor, as he so nicely put it, said if you're going to do something stupid, and that seems to be your MO, this may keep you alive long enough to get you in a hospital where we might be able to save you. But no matter what stupid thing I did, I survived. And I eventually got to retire, and now I'm doing armed security. I usually tried to get the high-risk jobs because they paid better. And I'm working security in the county office building, and somebody comes and gets me because there's a real nut job that needs to be thrown out of the building. And I'm trying to get him out of the building, and he realizes I'm armed, and now he starts making threats and says that he has a 40 and an extender, and he's got a round for each of us pointing at each of the 3 security guards. And I'm doing my job, and I'm doing it the right way, and I get him out into the lobby, and I think this is going to be the end of it. And then he reaches into his jacket, and as he starts to turn, he looks and sees that there's a red dot from the laser on my gun right on his chest. And I don't know if I'm going to shoot him, if he's going to get me. If he gets me, he's going to have to start shooting up everybody else. And I am very scared at this point that I'm going to have to kill this. But that red dot does just what it's supposed to do, and it makes him stop and think, and he follows my directions. And much to my dismay, they say let him walk out of the building. I'm going to put him in handcuffs, let him walk out of the building. And that was maybe the 3rd time I thought I was going to have to kill somebody or be killed. And every time I was able to find a way for everybody to walk away and go home. And I'm working these armed security jobs. And you would think, if you're not healthy enough to do other types of work, why are you doing that? Well, because it paid well and they were risky. So if I got killed on the job, my wife would get a big payout. And then my knees go and I can't work at all. And we put in for disability again. And apparently you can't get disability with 13% heart function, but bad knees, it's a little easier for some reason. And I eventually get the disability. And eventually we're pretty comfortable. And then I come across Project Refit and I realize that all the stupid things I had been doing that could have got me killed were borderline suicidal. Not everybody that's suicidal puts a gun to their head. I hid it so well, nobody ever noticed. Nobody ever saw it. If they did, they never said anything. I got to be very good at self-isolating. I could be in a room with 100 people and be all by myself at the same time. And then COVID hit, and everybody was self-isolating. So it wasn't that bad for me, since I had gotten to be pretty good at it over the years. And even though I was careful and wore a mask and social distanced and all that other fun stuff, I still wound up getting COVID. And I had been through the quarantine period where I was going to be allowed out again. And instead of being allowed out again, I wound up having a stroke. My son saw that something was wrong and called 911. He tried asking me what was wrong, and I couldn't say anything. I couldn't communicate. I thought I was screaming, but apparently there was no sound coming out of my mouth. I tried typing on my phone like a text message to tell him what was wrong, and it looked like the cat was dancing on the keyboard. There was just no outgoing communication. I was trapped inside my own head with every painful, traumatic, hurtful memory replaying itself over and over. It's like a bad episode of The Twilight Zone. And there was nothing I could do. So they got me in an ambulance, and I could hear the EMTs like talking and trying to ask questions, but I was kind of stuck there in my own little world in my head and couldn't respond to anything. When we got to the hospital, the doctors telling me about the clot buster protocol, or whatever they call it, and he doesn't know if I understand him. And the only thing I could do was like point to my arm, give me a shot. And eventually that's what they did. And it worked pretty quick, maybe 10 minutes or so. I could at least get a yes or no answer out, much else. And over the course of the next hour or so, they are doing CAT scans of my head with dye. And I guess they did 6 or 8 of them. I was told later that there was a neurosurgeon on call, because if there was any pieces of the clot that were still showing up on the CAT scan, they were going to have to crack my skull and go in and get them. Or if I started to bleed because of the shot, they were going to crack my skull and go in and try and cauterize the bleeds. But fortunately, none of that happened. They eventually got me down to a room in the ICU where I spent the night. The next morning, they come get me and they tell me I'm going for another CAT scan. And I told the nurse, they did like 8 of them last night. She's like, yeah, we're doing another one this morning. And I said, well, all that radiation, I should have superpowers by now. And she looked at me and she laughed. And I said, I'm serious. I said, I've been trying to move that cup on the table with my mind for about an hour. She goes, how's that working out for you? I said, I got a headache. And she says, yeah, now you're getting another CAT scan. And they took me down. They did another CAT scan. And I spent a week in ICU. And every day I would just ask, when can I go home? What do I have to do to get out of here? Who do I have to see to go home? And so I got out of there in record time. And I made it home on Saturday. So I went in Saturday night. And I was home Saturday afternoon. And everything was pretty good. And then about 4 o'clock in the morning, I got hold of my wife. And all I wanted was for her to hold me. And she was holding me. And I started crying. And I don't cry. And I cried that night. And I started talking to her and telling her about stuff I swore I would never burden her with. Things that happened on the job, things that happened growing up, that she never really needed to know that wasn't her pain, it was mine. And I cried, and I started letting it all go. And it was about 4 hours of crying, and her holding me and telling me everything was going to be okay. And the next day, I was kind of drained, and I was different. And everything was good. Everything was wonderful. My daughter looked at me one morning and said, "Who are you and what'd you do with my dad?" I had just changed that much, and I was happy to be around people. I wanted to be around. I love my wife so much, and I realized that I held so much back. I hardly ever told her that, or at least it felt that way. So I started every day off by telling her that I loved her. And that Sunday night, Donna would go over to Tiffany's and they would watch American Idol. I can't stand. And I would stay home and play on my computer. But this Sunday, I just wanted to be with my family. I wanted to go out. I wanted to be with people. I didn't want to be by myself. And I went. And when we went to leave, I kind of stumbled a little bit. And, they made me sit down and told them I was fine. I thought I was fine. And while I'm walking down the steps, I kind of collapsed again. And my son-in-law stopped me from falling over, probably getting hurt worse. And my daughter called 911, and another ambulance is out there. And I'm like, I'm fine. Everything's good. And they said, well, we're here. We should check you out. And I didn't argue. And the guy said, you really should take you to the ER. And I said, really? And he goes, well, if you were my dad, you'd be halfway there by now. I wouldn't even stop to ask you. So I said yes, and we went to the ER. And I found out that I was bleeding to death internally. And they did another COVID test, and they started giving me blood transfusions to replace the blood loss. And they eventually took me to a room. And for as long as I could remember, whenever I had to be in the hospital, I didn't want visitors. I didn't want Donna there. I didn't want anybody. I just wanted to be there alone. But this time I wanted Donna there with me. And they said it was okay. And then they came back and said, your COVID test came back positive, and I was back in quarantine. And I was not happy. And they said, it's probably a false positive, and we're going to have an infectious disease guy come check you out and, clear you. And but in the meantime, you have a procedure to get done. And as they're taking me away to put a scope down my throat and find out where I'm bleeding from, they tell me that I'm off, which made the procedure a lot easier. And they get done the procedure, and I'm awake, and they tell me I had gastric ulcers that were bleeding, that they cauterized, and a vein that was burst or split, that they had a clamp. And someone called Donna while I was getting the procedure done and told her that I was cleared. And when I got back to the room, she was there, and the most beautiful thing I ever saw, sitting there waiting for me. And she sat and held my hand for 2 hours, and all during these hospital stays. I was never really alone. I would call or FaceTime Donna every day. People from Project Refit would call me every day, make sure I was okay, did I need anything. Talk to Isaiah, to Tiffany. I didn't want to be alone anymore. I didn't have to deal with it by myself anymore. And I survived it all. It's still not over. Apparently it's going to be a long recovery, but I have people to help me through it, and that's going to make it a lot easier. But I found my place, and I'm trying to stay there. It's not always easy. I thought for sure after I got out that it was all done and over with, and I was going to go back to life before all this happened. Apparently I'm not, but that's okay, because I have my family and my friends and help me make it through. And that is my story. That is where I'm at right now, trying to finish up the recovery and get back to being a real human being again. But I think one of the reasons I made it through was because I found Project Refit, and there's a lot of support there, and we give each other a lot of support. And I opened up to my wife and didn't have to deal with the hurt and the pain alone. I don't like everything about this. I never panicked in my life, and now I have a panic attack if I have to wear my mask too long. And I'm learning to deal with little issues like that when you convince yourself that you're fearless and you're not afraid of death and you could do anything, when you find out that that's not really true, it requires some adjustment. And I promise you that the next time you hear from me in Joe's World, it will be a lot lighter and more pleasant. And that's the track we're going to kind of keep it on. But after a year of quarantine, there's a lot of people out there that I think are damaged as well. They may not know it and may need to hear this. If you're one of them, please let me know. Leave a message, send it, whatever. If you like this, please like, follow, subscribe, all those fun things that they tell you to do. My producer is Isaiah Travia. He has a YouTube series, Seymour's Basement, and you should like, follow, and subscribe to that as well. He'll thank me for that, because his is always funny. and I'll see you next time on Joe's World.
Hi there, it's me, Isaiah again. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Joe's World. But before you go, I want to tell you about Project Refit. Project Refit is a vet, military, first responder support group. They are boots on the ground and there for those that need support. They have online meetings on Monday and Friday at 9 p.m., which are streamed right on Facebook. However, Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. is private. And all of their members reach out to each other when needed. You don't need to be alone when they're there to support each other. You can find Project Refit on Facebook at Project Refit, or you could go to www.projectrefit.us on the web. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all in the next one. Bye!